Welcome to Nicole Osei Report. I'm Nicole Osei, and today we're going to be talking about the recent economic volatility on Wall Street, President Trump's escalating trade war, and tariffs. And I wanted to have an economist break that down. So I'm happy to be joined by the University of North Texas's Department of Economics Chair, Professor Jeffrey Rous. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So the stock market rose this morning, but earlier this week, we saw the markets plunge 2 days in a row in response to Trump's statements and actions amid his trade war with our allies. Just this morning, Canada announced a $20 billion in retaliatory tariffs, and the European Union also announced $28 billion in retaliatory tariffs as well. Can you explain why Wall Street is responding in this way and also what they're actually reacting to?
Yeah, so it's important to understand what Wall Street and what the stock market really is. A stock market is a way for individuals to own shares of companies in the United States. There are literally thousands of companies whose ownership shares are traded on Wall Street, and individuals can buy those shares. And the value of those shares is determined by the expected profitability of those companies. What the recent volatility indicates is two things. One is the constantly evolving trade war discussions with a lot of uncertainty makes people not sure what's going to happen. But also, there's a lot of research for over 100 years that indicates that free trade and a reduction in tariffs makes companies more profitable. And so the talk of increasing tariffs, creating trade wars, is kind of well regarded to be something that will reduce the profitability of companies and therefore reduce the value of those companies.
Can you talk about the origins and benefits of free trade? I think that's an important discussion to have as even just a baseline for what we're talking about.
Yeah, free trade is something that Adam Smith first started talking about in the 1700s. David Ricardo further kind of refined our understanding of that in the 1800s. And basically, free trade allows us to live better lives and consume more goods. And we see this in our lives every day. Most of us benefit from free trade by working at a job where we earn a decent income and then using that money to buy goods made by others, whether it's at Walmart or Target or wherever. And we can consume more goods by doing it that way rather than trying to produce everything we consume ourselves. If you think back to the frontier days, the pioneer days in the United States, people who lived out on the prairie were producing most of the goods that they consumed, and they were pretty poor. The Industrial Revolution allowed us to find cheaper ways to produce goods, and then people could specialize in what they do best and use the income they earn to buy the stuff they really want to consume. And economic growth is basically dependent largely on that.
You know, when watching interviews featuring American citizens talking about this trade war, I noticed there was a lack of understanding of how tariffs work. And can you briefly explain what tariffs are? And I also wanted to ask you, is there ever a good way to enact tariffs if they're done with precision?
Yeah, so like I was saying, we're better off when we engage in free trade with our own production, working in a company and trading for the goods we want. The same is true for companies, or it's true for countries. In countries, we tend to produce the things that our country and our workers are best at, and then we trade with other countries where they produce what they're best at, and that makes us all better off. What tariffs do is impose a tax, sort of like a sales tax on goods coming from other countries, reducing the benefit of this free trade exchange and allowing people to do what they do best. Now that's sort of one of the fears here, is that tariffs mean that we're going to have to produce at home what we would do more expensively than if we could allow somebody else to do it elsewhere. Is there ever a good use of tariffs? Tariffs are something that we impose on ourselves. And let's think about it another way around. If we think about sanctions, when countries in the global community want to punish a country for its bad actions, let's say North Korea or Iran, or Russia, the first thing that we do is we impose sanctions. We limit that country's ability to engage in free trade, and that makes them poorer. With tariffs, what we're essentially doing is imposing that same free trade restrictions on ourselves. You know, I've heard people say that, oh, so what if some good costs 10% more if it's made in the United States? At least then the income is going to an American worker. But the problem is, if every good that we're producing goes up in cost by 10%, we all get to consume 10% less goods, and that makes us poorer. And that's the important part about this, I think, to understand. Like I said, are there ever good use of tariffs? If you want to punish another country for its bad actions in one way or another, you would impose tariffs on that. Yes, that usually has a negative impact on you as well. But if you really want to discourage, you know, North Korea or Iran or Russia from doing bad things, sometimes it's worth some of that pain in order to inflict additional pain on those other countries.
Why do you think? Because we saw this in Trump's first administration. He was uh, prone to using tariffs, and again on our allies. And in the last one, just one instance was he had to basically scramble to bail out farmers because they were hit hard by that first round of tariffs. And I think maybe they were done in the form of subsidies. Why do you think he's taking that same tactic in his second administration? Why is he so tariff prone?
You know, there is a real issue here. Manufacturing jobs were a fairly large portion of the U.S. economy after World War II, and that's kind of been in steady decline ever since. Um, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as the jobs people get instead are better jobs. For example, in the year 1900, 40% of the U.S. economy, or 40% of U.S. jobs were in agriculture. Now it's less than 2%. We produce more now with fewer workers, way fewer workers in agriculture than we did over 100 years ago. And most of the people that were in the agricultural sector, well, they moved into manufacturing where they got better jobs. Now they're moving from manufacturing into yet other jobs. In the 70s and 80s, a lot of the manufacturing jobs that were lost to automation, and a lot of that automation made workers even more productive. So we had fewer people working in manufacturing, but in some cases they were doing better. They were better off. In some cases, people moved. You know, if a family, the parents worked in manufacturing, their kids went to college, and then they went to work for a computer industry, in the computer industry, so they were better off. What's happened starting in around 2000 is a massive shift of manufacturing jobs to China. And this isn't something that took a generation to occur where the children of the manufacturers could go into something else. This is something that happened within 5 or 6 years. And that caused a lot of dislocation, a lot of economic pain. And so I think what Trump is doing is he's responding to that and thinking, well, how do we bring those jobs back? And doing that will invariably make Americans on average poorer. Whether it will bring the jobs back, we're still not really sure if that's going to happen. Most economists, I think that the better response is, now that manufacturing has moved, is to find ways to sort of accelerate the transition so that people go from one industry to another, maybe a growing industry in the United States. But I think that's what he's got in mind, and I think it is a real problem. There clearly was a huge dislocation economically from about 2000, starting in about the year 2000, moving on into today, and that needs to be addressed. This is just a very crude weapon to kind of address that issue.
And as we were talking about yesterday, just kind of like moving a little bit further, and now we're talking about AI. I mean, there could be another round of job losses to artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this is actually that's a really important point, or it ties into this really, because international trade or free trade is just like another form of technology. So when we can come up with a new technology that allows us to do things better, more cheaply, there are going to be people who are displaced by that, right? And in what we really want is technology that complements workers, making each worker more productive, increasing their income, rather than technology that substitutes that is a substitute for workers, which kind of displaces workers. With international trade, when a job moves overseas or when production moves overseas, we're substituting we're substituting U.S. workers with foreign workers, so that hurts U.S. workers. With technology, if we can adopt technologies, if AI can be used to make workers more productive, that'll increase their incomes. What we really don't want to see is, what we really would prefer not to encourage is AI and other technologies that are substitutes for workers, putting people out of work.
Do you think Trump's strategy will backfire or work itself out? Because, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing this escalate between our allies.
These types of trade wars and escalating tariffs never work well. When Adam Smith first started talking about this in the 1860s, 1870s, tariffs across Europe were on the magnitude of 35, 40, 50%. And countries were mostly self-sufficient. And as a result of his kind of preaching the free trade sermon, countries started rolling back tariffs. They started specializing in what they do best, and the industrial revolution took off, and economic growth accelerated, and we all live a much more at a much higher standard of living than we did in the 17 or 1800s. And part of that is due to this specialization and allowing people to do what they do best and producing goods most cheaply, and then trading for what we need. There's very little evidence. I can't think of any evidence really that would indicate that this is going to work itself out for the best.
And I want to peek behind the curtain a bit. Is that a sentiment shared among most economists? What are you all, when you're talking amongst yourselves, what conversations are you all having?
I think the conversation we're having is that free trade as a general idea makes everybody better off. Although there's always there's an almost constant level of pain as people's jobs get eliminated and they have to find new jobs. And if this takes place over the course of generations, it's fairly easy for next generations to adapt to a new economy and for this growth process to move forward, and nobody's hurt that much. What's happened in the last, since 2000, when China decided to really heavily move into manufacturing, was a very rapid change. And this is something that really does need to be addressed by government, to try to ease that pain and to try to get workers to transition into something where they can again see their standard of living increasing.
So, just to wrap up, if you were to advise the Trump administration, what steps would you ask them to take to kind of wind this trade war down and course correct?
I think I would advise that these tariffs are not going to get the desired result. To the extent that factories do move back to the United States where production is more expensive, goods will be more expensive and people will be able to consume fewer goods and the standard of living will fall, and nobody wants that. In the short run, the tariffs will create more inflation because the tariffs are going to make not only the goods coming in more expensive for people, but a lot of the goods that are coming in are inputs to stuff that's made in the United States. So for example, if we put a tariff on lumber products coming from Canada, that means housing is going to be more expensive, and we have a housing affordability problem right now. The best thing to do would be to try to find ways to retrain and help workers in this transition from jobs that have been lost in the United States to growing industries.
Professor Rous, thank you so much for joining me. That's very important information. And for those of you watching at home, leave a comment down below. What do you think of President Trump's handling of the economy thus far? And what do you think about this ongoing trade war? And if you like this kind of content, news, politics, and current trends, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.